let's start recording. Okay, so Tim, do you want to give us an update for the incubator repositories?
So Brendan Burns has submitted his proposal, and there's been minor feedback, nothing major, but the intent is that everything in incubator will eventually have to have a new home, and there will be three different types of repositories. The first is the main Kubernetes org repositories, and hopefully that will slim down too as well, because right now there's a bunch of repos in the main Kubernetes org that shouldn't be there, one would argue. And then the second structure are SIG sponsored repos, and that's where a lot of the work that our SIG would probably house other repos. So that will be owned by a Kubernetes SIGs org, and provided that the SIG leads agree that this is a good project to sponsor, they can provision and set up the repository for other people to use. Some of the logistics with respect to, like, what policies are going to be maintained on this SIGs repo is still not all spelled out, but that's okay. I think that's still going to work itself out over time. The last type of repository are what folks are calling associated repositories, where it basically allows people to be covered by the CNCF umbrella. So if a company wants to sponsor a project but still wants to house it underneath their main org, so like if I worked for Heptio, Sonobui project that I work on might be an associated project in the future, right? Where we would have the CLA bot there. So that means if you signed the CLA at any moment in time, whether working on Kubernetes, you could contribute to anything that's in the associated umbrella. Mm-hmm. So I think for most of our work within this SIG, that would fall underneath the Kubernetes SIGs org. And it just needs to follow the naming convention that's spelled out in Brendan's doc. So it'd be scheduling dash whatever, right?
Okay. Okay. So this is not final though, right?
It's not merged yet. There's still feedback that's occurring, but most of the feedback's pretty minor. And it's not blocking. We haven't had any people say that they absolutely are opposed to this, and it's been out we've been talking about it for weeks internally, and we've exposed it for 1 week to the entire community. So there hasn't been any major detractors that we have seen.
Okay, so it's close to final. It's almost final.
Yes.
All right, good. So let me put this in the doc quickly. So today is 15th. All right. So Kubernetes repos are incubators. Okay.
They're actually, I'm pretty certain that folks would allow us to move and create repos there now. I don't think there's anything preventing it because the org has been created, and I have admin rights to the org. I just wanted to make sure that I get buy-in before I created any repos, because what we probably should be doing is sponsoring 1 or 2 folks and try to feedback on what the mechanism feels like and if it works for everybody, if there's any problems, before we kind of unleash it on the whole community.
Right. We can try to see if the folks behind the Firmament scheduler are interested in trying it, or we can try one of the other tools. Maybe Abesh wants to, for example, move one of his smaller projects, maybe cluster capacity tool, for example, under the new repository.
Yeah, we don't mind being guinea pig, so we would love to do that. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. So, but I guess we shouldn't rush it if there are still logistics to figure out. We can probably wait another week or so if I'm not drawing Deepak. Right? I mean, is there any issue with like waiting 1 more week or so?
I agree. Like I think it's better if all the things are hashed out and then we start.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I don't think there's going to be major things. I think us piloting a couple of minor stuff and being the guinea pig actually would help the whole community because
in that case, let's go forward and do it.
So it's a couple of questions there, Tim. So we're going to have a test infra available in this repo, this environment?
Yes, but it's not mandatory. So you could opt into it. So if you wanted to be able to opt into the entire sort of test jiggery, you can opt into that. Yes.
Okay. So if you want to build out like end-to-end, testing and all that, so then I guess in that case we would have to do that. But for BART, you mentioned that's mandatory though, CLA BART and the merge BART. Don't we need to have test infra for those?
Yes, you're going to have those bots. Some of the bots have to be on, and we will have to enable that. But I want to make sure. Yeah. I want to talk with everyone first to make sure that everyone's okay with buying into having a pilot and getting the jiggery in place.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So you can let us know. I mean, we're not in a rush. I mean, but as I said in my email as well, we don't mind being guinea pig. Any dirty work or whatever we need to do, we're happy to do that.
Well, I can easily create the repo today, but I won't get all the other I's dotted and T's crossed until I get other folks looped in.
So just another thing I wanted to kind of run it by. I think so. Firmament has two different components. One is Poseidon, and another one is Firmament. Firmament is C++ based, and Poseidon is a kind of a glue between Kubernetes and Firmament, which is Go, which is what we wrote. So is that issue? I guess we will have to make the Bazel thing work with the C++ and all that, isn't it? If the whole build process and all that.
So long as the build jiggery works, I don't think it will matter.
Okay.
Yeah, it might take some extra effort though to get the build.
And most of the build apparatus is containerized builds. So as long as you have like a two-stage containerized build, like a build container and a deployment container, which is like what pretty much 90% of the Kubernetes stuff does. You can build Kubernetes locally, but like the actual build apparatus for testing is all containerized builds.
The other good news is, one of my colleagues actually, they took out the whole federation out of the core Kubernetes repo, out of a separate repo actually. So we have expertise, so we can kind of tap into that knowledge as well.
Yep, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, sure. So, actually, I have two of my colleagues in the call. Dilip, I think Dilip was involved with that, as part of that. So it'll be good.
All right.
Maybe you can send me a list of who the main collaborators will be on the repo.
Okay.
And then I can add them, and then I will add Bobby and myself as like the administrators or whatever.
Okay. Just a quick question now. So I'm going to send you all the list of people who are going to be in this repo. But we did, so I don't know if you folks are familiar with Firmament was started by researchers out of Cambridge University.
I've been following it since its inception. So yes, I'm intimately familiar with it.
Yeah, so the reason I would like to add those guys as well, though. I think Unal is already a member. I'm not really sure about you know them?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah. By the way, Unal is here in UC Berkeley now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He moved here, so he's a postdoc actually. So we worked very closely with him actually as part of this thing. So we should be able to do that. The only thing we need to make sure is that they are Kubernetes members, though, isn't it?
Yes, they would have to be Kubernetes. I have to take a look whether or not this main org has that as a requirement because it's a separate org.
Okay.
And I don't necessarily know if it has to be a member of the main Kubernetes org. But
the documentation says that though. It says something about that they need to be members. I'm looking at it right now. They need to be active.
I doubt it. For anyone who wants to contribute, I don't think it requires to be a member. Right? Even the main repo doesn't need you to be a member to contribute.
No, but you need to be a member to maintain. Right?
Maintain, yes.
But I don't even know if you need to be a member to maintain inside of this separate org.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because it's a totally different org.
So the member, we're talking about the odd member, isn't it? Like the way you have to kind of get the odd membership set up and all that. And I really doubt if UNIL has that. So,
that's one of the logistical things we're going to have to work through. So
okay, good.
Yep.
Good.
All right. Actually, I've gone through one of these papers on Firmament Scheduler as well, but I was wondering if you guys can have a presentation in one of our SIG meetings for basically everybody who is not familiar, and to refresh our own memories as well. So it might be useful if you can have like a, I don't know, 20, 30-minute presentation in one of our SIG meetings. If others,
Sure. I'll try to bring along UNIL as well in that actually. If he's
that would be great. What do you think, Tim?
I think that'd be good. I think long term, I know the path that you guys followed. Long term, if we eventually get to the point where we have a full scheduling framework, it's in my heart of hearts, I would ideally love to see the Firmament scheduler be the mainline scheduler. That'd be a long-term cycle though. I don't see that happening anytime soon. Right?
Yeah, as I said in my email as well, there are functionality gaps and which we are currently working towards. But overall, the architecture, the way it does things is really amazing, actually. So that's the reason we spent like last 6 or 9 months actually doing this.
Yeah. One of the things that I'd definitely be interested in hearing or seeing in a presentation is how the resource tracking fits with the Firmament. I guess that would be the Poseidon layer, I guess.
How it works with Heapster. So we have a Heapster. Is that the question?
More just, sort of how the Kubernetes resources are mapped to what the Sure. operates on. That's all.
Definitely. I think so. Shiva is there on the call. He's the one who wrote that code actually. So he can definitely walk us through it. Yeah. So exactly. So in the Firmament, I don't know if you guys read that paper, there's a concept of task descriptor, resource descriptor. So your question would be, how would you map that to the corresponding entities in Kubernetes? Basically?
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely.
Or other scheduling rules that you guys are working on, I guess, like affinity, anti-affinity.
That's exactly. So we started that. We have a very high-level design. And so we're starting out with the simple soft constraints, and then the hard constraints. And then we're implementing XOR rules as well, so that, I don't want to deploy. So I have a replica set of 5 replicas. I want to make sure they all go to separate nodes. So those kind of things using the XOR kind of a structure. But the complex constraints, we are still working through the design and all that. So we're not there yet. But I think the initial ones, hopefully we should have that pretty soon.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Looking forward to your presentation at some point. Let us know whenever you think.
Sure. So let me I want to make sure that UNIL is in there as well, because at the end of the day, these guys are the one, they've been working on it. Both of them, Malti and UNIL, they got their thesis PhD on this.
Right.
So.
All right. Sounds great.
I also have a similar question. So not only that, not only that, what are the gaps as compared to default scheduler that we have in Kubernetes, and also what are the similarities? Are also there other things that are not in default scheduler that are
definitely
that are provided by this Firmament scheduler?
Definitely. The whole rescheduling and the gang scheduling and all those kind of things.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Next. Yeah, go ahead.
So we send out all the names to you folks, and so Jim will create a repo, and then I guess so. The other things, the README file, the structure of the incubation pretty much stays the same. The README file which I've sent out, is that the right way to do it? Is it pretty much the same like the way the incubation earlier incubation was done, or is that something different?
Because it's SIG sponsored, you don't need to do the whole incubator thing, which was a more broader Kubernetes scope thing.
Okay.
So as long as the emails, there isn't actually a process that's been spelled out as part of the document. But we actually they commented on that recently. at least Aaron did, to talk about like we should document an actually well-defined process, just so when we start piloting these things, we actually can, help people to do A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
But no, I was talking more about a README file. You go in there to a repo, for example, and you see what exactly this is, what are the key advantages. Like a README file. I don't know. I can send it again, but that's what I was thinking of actually including that. When you go to the
yeah, that would be great. Of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the next item on the agenda, I want to give an update on priority and preemption. This is an effort that multiple people are working on. There are different pieces of this work which are already there. There has been some improvement in the performance of priority and preemption, particularly in the area of improving performance of the new scheduling queue. There has been some work on adding priority for critical system components, such as queue proxy, kubedns, et cetera, to ensure that. Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick question: when you're doing that, what components are you updating? Are you updating the kube scriptory stuff, or are you updating it because like this affects many deployments, including both the kube scriptory stuff as well as kubeadm? Like
yeah, that's actually a good point. I've mentioned it in that rollout doc, and when I shared it, I asked people who are more familiar with KOps or like kubeadm and all to comment on this, because I'm not 100% familiar with all of the details in these tools. So what we have done is that we have updated the YAML files that specify basically the configuration of these components like kube proxy, kubedns, etc. So is that enough for all of these tools to work similarly? When they bring up a cluster?
You'll need to. I'm gonna put you in an assignee in the notes to add a link to the PR for the kube stuff, because it'll need to be socialized broader. So what will likely happen is people will miss the boat for a period of time, and then they will be added on and try to figure out where it was. But I think if we were to I can more broadly PSA in SIG cluster lifecycle that here is the PR that you guys should reference. So if you have the exact version of one that you did for kube stuff, I can reference that as the canonical example.
Yeah, I can add it to the doc. There has been a PR recently to add these, and one of the SIG app guys has approved. So, anyways, I will add the PR. So yes, there has been some of this effort. There has been effort on improving or updating the documents with the new behavior, explaining that, for example, rescheduler is going to be retired. And some of the new changes in the daemon set controller. Klaus is working on the daemon set controller side. His PRs are coming. Some of them are already merged. The other ones are going to be merged, hopefully all before the code freeze. The only basically item which is left is finding customers or real customers who want to try this feature before we go to beta. Luckily, we have found one internal customers at Google who are willing to try this, and we are going to enable the feature in their clusters very soon. If you guys know other people who have like larger clusters, we don't want to go with like super large clusters, but we want to have this test kind of meaningful by going to clusters which have like several tens of nodes. Not very large clusters, just like medium clusters, I would say.
So are you going to go to beta this cycle or next cycle is what you're saying?
We will try to go beta this cycle if we get enough testing results back before the code freeze, which is that's like 10 days away.
That's always really hard though, like to get actual customer feedback, because no one deploys, like history has taught me, no one like in the actual community deploys bits until it's like .1 or .2.
Yes.
So like when 1.10 releases, no one's going to actually even use it until it's like 1.10.1.
Yeah, it's a little challenging. We don't want to really rush it if we don't have confidence that it works. One of the bigger things for us is to ensure that this feature is not going to break any existing customer if they don't use if they don't use the feature. Basically, that's one of the bigger things, because if you try it and it doesn't work well, it's easier to go back, basically not setting priority for your pods. But breaking the existing customers who don't use the feature is definitely a big problem, and we don't want to face it.
And I think Ajay, mentioned in our last meeting, definitely like we are interested in this feature using internally for our online clusters, but I doubt that can happen before 1.10 is released.
Okay. Yeah. So if we really feel we are not ready or we are not confident, we are not going to go to beta in 1.10.
Yeah, actually they are. So it seems like also it would be better if we can go beta in 1.10, and then it might put more confidence so that we can use it. So it's like
yeah, but the problem is that if we go to 1.10 and if we go to beta in 1.10, the feature will be enabled by default. So everybody, including those who don't want to use the feature, will get it. And that's why I'm saying we must ensure that it doesn't break existing customers, because even those customers who want to use the feature is going to have it enabled in their cluster. So that's what we are trying to ensure is working fine and it's not going to break anything.
yeah. And
So here's a question, a broader question that applies to this. There's a lot of the CNI providers are going to need to have priority and preemption in place because they deploy right now, as Demon said, pods. Have you guys worked with, or have you communicated with any other the CNI providers, whether it be Weave or Caligo or
No.
No?
That's actually a good feedback. No, we haven't. While we don't expect anything to basically happen in case we don't use, if we don't use the scheduling features of the daemon set, we cannot really be sure without communicating with those guys or without testing it in more realistic scenarios.
If you have a parent issue that kind of like can open up, I can loop in the appropriate people. So like if
we don't have a task tracker, so let me just put it in the chat. So the parent issue is basically for moving to beta as this one. Okay. All right. So is there any other question, or should we move to the next item on the agenda?
Just a quick, Bobby, you mentioned that the rescheduler is going to be retired. What does that mean?
So rescheduler has been used to ensure that our critical pods are scheduled when there are not enough resources in the cluster or there are no nodes in the cluster that can run those critical pods. Mm-hmm. With the introduction of priority and preemption, our critical pods will have the highest priority in the cluster. So our main scheduler will take care of scheduling those if the cluster is out of resources. As a result, we don't need to have a rescheduler anymore.
Yeah, but just the name's terrible. It's a separate component that was created just for critical add-on pods.
Yeah,
it's not a true rescheduler.
Correct.
Yeah, which is much better, because that's the problem with the reschedule, because Firmament has built-in rescheduling capability. So that was the thing we had against the rescheduler, because it's a separate process basically. Now priority and preemption is part of Kubernetes, so which is good.
Yeah. I guess our rescheduler, or at least part of a rescheduler scenario in Kubernetes world, is called descheduler. And Avesh can tell you a lot more about that too. Okay. So yeah. The next item is a bug that we have faced recently, happening a lot more in certain GKE as well as open source Kubernetes customers. We have seen that scheduler state becomes stale, or basically scheduler cache has some stale information. This is particularly in two scenarios, one for nodes, one for pods. I guess we've talked briefly about those before. So we are working on trying to basically chase the problem down to see where it's coming from. Our recent investigations show that it's probably something outside of the scheduler, maybe something like some events are not sent to the scheduler by either etcd or API server. So folks here at Google are looking into this issue to find out. But some of the symptoms that we have seen so far is that, for example, a scheduler thinks that a node is full because pods are running on the node, but the pods are actually deleted. They are not deleted from the scheduler cache. So scheduler believes that those pods are running. As a result, it refuses to schedule new pods on the nodes. And what happens in this case is that autoscaler does not add new nodes to the cluster because it believes that these pending pods are schedulable on the nodes. So there is a disagreement between autoscaler and scheduler. Autoscaler waiting for scheduler to schedule those pods, and scheduler never does that because scheduler believes that those nodes are occupied. So as a result, we see that a lot of these pods remain pending for a long time, and of course, this is undesirable behavior. We've also seen scheduler trying a lot to schedule pods on nodes that don't exist. And this problem is we have been able to add a workaround for it in the scheduler. Scheduler deletes such nodes if it faces the problem that some of these nodes don't exist when it tries to bind pods to the nodes. Anyways, so the first part of the problem is a major part. Hopefully we can find a solution, or we can find the root cause. If you guys have any more information about similar situation, or know how to fix it, or know what could be the root cause, please let us know.
Also, like obviously I don't know the root cause, but I think around 1 week or 2 weeks before, there were some guys like who were having, I think, similar issues, and they were discussing on Slack channel. And I think in the end, what those guys did, they increased the I think QPS. It seems at least in their cluster, when they had lower QPS, that time they had that issue. But I think when they increased that, the issue was solved. So yeah, so it seems like those guys hit the same problem, but I might be wrong, but it seems like that they had the same problem. And as I said, like when they increased that, then the problem went away. That's what. In fact, we can see the history, because I was working with them also, like I mean whatever I could do, but in the end they did that, and I think their issue was resolved.
Actually, that could be really the case, because one of our engineers was also believing that it could be caused because of the QPS. But I will also tell these guys who are working on the API server side and give them this feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. So moving tense and tolerations to beta. Actually, a couple days ago when I talked to David Upp, he told me that it would be great if we can move tense and tolerations to beta in 110. When I looked at it, it doesn't seem to be there is any blocking issue for moving tense and tolerations to beta. So if nobody has any objections, we can try to do that in 110.
I think the only thing that is required actually is just documentation changes, because it's already enabled by default.
Yeah.
So I don't believe there's any gating options. But the one thing we should do, honestly, is that if there's any leftover annotation crib code, that should be removed. Yes. And that was an opt-in
Oh, by the way, let me clarify one thing. Sorry for interrupting you. So it's already in beta, and that's why it's already.
Yeah.
It should be moved to GA. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually I was wondering like.
Yeah. I wrote it wrong in that email, and I repeated that. So sorry about that. It should be moved to GA, not beta. It's already.
We should disable the old. There was a feature gated flag added to enable the older version of the alpha annotations. And if we're going to move to GA, we should probably remove that bit as well.
Okay.
And all the associated tests and code along with it.
As far as I know, like for Tencent tolerance, we already removed those things. We don't have any alpha annotations right now.
We have already removed most of that, but we should double check and ensure that.
Yeah, as far as I know, right now we don't have any annotation stuff left.
Right.
I'd have to double check.
Yeah, we have already done that. We have dropped the support for annotation, but we have to double check and ensure that there is nothing left.
Yeah.
Okay, and we of course need to update the documentation. Otherwise, I don't think there is anything major left to be done for moving it to GA. Okay, so let's see. There was, I guess, Ravi had one item to talk about an issue.
2 items.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So the first one is related to using variants. Like as of now in balanced resource allocation, we are using only CPU and memory. So in online environment, what we have noticed is there are chances that nodes exhaust their PVC limits, but still, basically the number of mounts, the number of volumes that could be mounted on a node while having enough CPU and memory, or it could happen the other way around too. So the question is, should we, as of now, they're hard-coded to like 39 in case of AWS and 16 in case of GC, etc. So should we go ahead and support them till the CSI plugin support is by default enabled in scheduler?
Yeah, I have no problem with that, but we should clarify things a bit. So it's not the PVCs. We're talking about the attached volumes, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So basically, given the number of attached volumes and given the number of volumes required by PVC, we try to balance the number of volumes among the pods, and we can have a priority function that tries to balance the number of volumes. Yeah, so sure, I don't see any problem with having this other priority function.
And one more thing, I think in one of our previous meetings when we discussed about it, I think we also discussed, I think that time Brian Grant was also in the meeting, that we would like to have some sort of generic function so that in the future, if we have to do the same thing for GPUs, we might add them also, or maybe some other resources.
Right. That's a good point. For PVs in particular, I think it's going to be a little harder. But we may be able to do that. This is slightly different because we need to basically look at the number of PVs already attached. We also need to look at the number of PVs requested by the PVC, and then combine those two, which is slightly different from the other models where you have, for example, a certain amount of CPU available on a node, and a new pod is asking for a certain amount, and you can balance those. So this is slightly different model. But if we can find a good generic model that supports both, it'll be awesome. Otherwise, we can just have like a particular version for PVs.
Okay. Yeah, that's one thing. And the second thing is related to metrics-based scheduling. So I'd like to know if we want to have that as part of standard scheduler, or should we use scheduler extender to build something? So,
sorry, I missed the first part. What kind of scheduling you said?
Metrics-based scheduling, like we can use the metrics server to get the latest metrics.
Please don't add that.
Yeah, and I think the context is it was I think the first issue like that we want to address it's for best effort pods because they don't specify resource requirements.
Yeah, so this is basically basically have the same terminology here. I guess you're talking about usage-based scheduling, right? By metrics and
Yeah,
SIG.
right.
So actual resource usage. Honestly, I think this is something that should be part of the scheduler. It could be something feature gated maybe for now.
I'd be opposed for any metrics that are not part of the standard node updates. So if you wanted to take Heapster updates, I think that has to be extender. Could you please mute Ravi? You're really loud. But if it's part of the main node update, if some basic like load average is passed through, I'm totally okay with that in the main scheduler. But if you wanted to add any Heapster-based information, like, there's much more you could apply than load average if you wanted to, then I think I'm pretty opposed, because of the matrix API is kind of I don't know, for lack of a better word, it's kind of a tire fire. So I think it would open up a can of things that we don't want to let into the scheduler.
Right. I agree with Tim. I think the general idea of having like usage-based scheduling is great, and I think it could be part of the scheduler. But the problem here is that how their usage is reported today is not a part of a standard API. That's the main problem here, I think.
But since I think 1.8 we have that native metrics server, right? That can be used with the API server, and behind that could be anything. It doesn't matter whether Heapster or any other thing.
Again, my tire fire comment still applies there.
Yeah. And but I think another concern is I think that we had before. We also need to check that whether the metrics being reported, those are like instant metrics, or they are some based on some period of time. Because I think as far as I remember, the concern we had, if they are not like based on some time period, then it might require some changes in metrics server.
I'm not so sure if I understood this part. So first, they change all the time, right? Usage is not something fixed.
I mean, when you are doing like usage based, like I think you would like to have some sort of based on history, some sort of average.
You have local history and global history, and usually it's some type of quantization barrier, right? Like your load average is an average across some period of time X. Right. And it could be very spiky for some short periods of time.
Exactly.
It should be normalized, right? Yeah.
So also, I think we need to check whether that is already there or not.
So the metric server by default, it stores for a minute or so. It won't have a database or something that is where it stores the metrics for a period of time.
I see.
I'd almost, if you wanted to be smart about this type of thing, you could do automatic update on insertion versus putting it into the scheduler, right? So if you had some type of history, you could have your own separate component that says, if you have history of the actual usage data that you're tracking over time, you can augment the initial incoming inbound request with something that looks approximate to reality. And that type of augmenting on inbound is probably better than building into the mainline scheduler, because it could be a totally separate system. Because if you put stuff into the mainline scheduler, it will only be as good as the data that you are feeding into it, and that's subject to change over time. So I think what you really want is finding a good fit, right? And most of the time, people are super bad at sizing. So the only way you can actually find a good fit with the current resources that are available is to have an expert system that's taking a look at the entire state of the cluster.
So I guess there are two parts to this. One is the part that you mentioned as for like basically trying to guess sort of or estimate the amount of resources needed by a pod. And the other part of it is to find the amount of resources available on the nodes. So the latter part, which is the resources available on the nodes, it's based on usage basically that is reported, can still be received from the metric server, and that can be used as maybe a priority function perhaps to ensure that we are not trying to, or we try to use the nodes that are less busy by looking at their usage as well, not only by the requested resources that we do today.
Yeah, this gets really hairy and fuzzy.
It could, right. Right. So we need to, I think whatever path we go forward with, we should probably either build an extender first, maybe, and then then bring it back to the scheduler if we someday feel that this is reliable enough, I would say. Or we could completely feature get it. It looks like Tim is not on board with putting it in the scheduler, right? Okay.
I'd be fine with extender first,
Okay.
and then migrating over time.
Okay. Yeah. What do you feel, Ravi, about this approach?
Yeah, so the kind of a demo thing that I've built, a prototype, it actually uses extender. So that's what I was thinking. First, we'll put it in extender, check how the performance is, and then based on it, if it fits everyone's requirements, we can move to the core schedule.
Sure, that sounds good.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, that's all we've had. If there is any other question, comments.
I just have one minor thing to ask. Like for scheduler, for our SIG group, like we have two kinds of, I think, we have reviewers and we have approvers list, right?
Right.
So I was wondering, and actually even I'm not part of any of those lists, even Ravi is not part of any of those lists. Also, like obviously, like if we could be added to like those lists, definitely we would like to be more responsible. It's not, I mean, unless like we are really sure about that, we would not like to tag them. So is there something like that could be considered and we could be added?
Okay. Tim, do you wanted to say something, or?
The typical process is to just submit the PR for the areas that you're interested in and loop in the current approvers.
Yeah, exactly. So I would suggest go for reviewers, and then first, and then maybe in a month or so, add yourselves to the approvers as well after you've done enough reviews.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Any other question, comments?
So I had one question. Is the eviction feature in the scheduling area?
So by eviction, do you mean the kubelet eviction or preemption? We have two similar features in Kubernetes, which are named differently for removing the confusion. So are you talking about kubelet eviction?
I was mainly talking about the taint-based evictions.
Taint-based evictions. So taint-based eviction is done by kubelet.
Right. So is that an area for the scheduling, or?
What do you mean? We support also taints in the scheduling side, but not the eviction part of it.
Basically, my question was about trying to understand the behavior when nodes go unresponsive. I mean, we are on the old Kubernetes release and we haven't turned on this feature, but last time we turned it on. We probably don't or maybe I didn't read the documentation enough, but from what I have read, like it's not well documented. So I was like, we enabled the feature and we forgot to enable the admission controller that puts the default tolerations, and so we started seeing immediate pod evictions, and then I guess the admission controller is required to put the default taints. But what is the behavior that we can expect from this feature when a node goes unresponsive? Will the pod will automatically get evicted and run on a different node? And then what happens if the node comes back online?
Sure. So
I want to understand.
Yeah, my knowledge in this area is not very strong. So I believe it's not a part of the scheduler for sure. The scheduler is not responsible for removing pods from those unresponsive nodes. But of course, if the pods are removed, probably maybe by the node controller, and are added back, then they come back to the scheduling queue, and the scheduler will reschedule them on existing nodes which are available. That part I know, but the first part, which is like who is removing those pods from the nodes, I don't know for sure, but I believe it must be probably a node controller.
Yeah, actually, I can say something more about it.
Okay.
So definitely, like we are talking about tent-based evictions right here. So where like a node controller is adding tents wherever like I think we are having two conditions like not ready and I think unreachable. And in that case, it's adding those tents to the nodes. And I think we have default admission plugin. I mean, not default. I mean, we have admission plugin that could add like tolerations so that some pods could be would not be evicted for I think 5 minutes or so. So
Right.
that yeah, something like that. And I think we can definitely I think tune those parameters. Yeah.
If the node remains unresponsive and the pod doesn't tolerate the taint, what happens? Like, is the node, if the pod
Yeah.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
evicted and then it's rescheduled on a different node,
Yeah. Exactly.
and
Exactly.
then after that, let's say the node comes back up and starts becoming responsive, the pod is still running on that, the container is still running on that node. So what happens then?
If I think first of all, if the pod has been rescheduled, definitely pod is not going to go back. If the those containers are still running, I think they either need to be garbage collected or I don't know. I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, I mean definitely pod is not going to go back to that node. It has
The kubelet will evict. The kubelet will take it off the node because the bounded pod, the location of the bounded pod, which is a location inside of etcd that it's watching, it will no longer be as bound to that kubelet. So as soon as it comes back online and talks to the API server, the kubelet will remove it.
I see. Okay.
And one thing to clarify here, I'm pretty sure you know already, that when eviction happens, a pod is killed and someone should be creating a replacement for the pod.
Right,
So it's not like that the pod is gonna go back to the scheduling queue. The pod is killed,
yeah,
died,
exactly.
and then a replica set controller or I don't know, daemon set controller or whoever, whatever controller or deployment, whatever controller is behind that pod should create a replacement for the pod. So if you create your pod manually, for example, or directly, there is not going to be any replacement for it.
Right. When you say pod is killed, you mean that is deleted and a new pod instance comes up.
The pod is killed and a new instance comes up if there is any controller behind that pod that creates a replacement for it. If there is no controller, for example, if you go and create your pod by kubectl directly, then there is not going to be any replacement.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. I agree.
Thanks, guys. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Just a quick question, for coming back to this firmament thing.
Sure.
Is it possible to have two different repos, one for firmament and one for Poseidon, the glue code thing? Or how is that going to work? I mean, I think that would be the right way to do it. I just wanted to.
It's up to you. It's up to you guys.
Okay.
Whatever you think is the right thing to do.
Okay, great.
But if Poseidon is the one that is related to Kubernetes, I would suggest have one for both, basically, maybe on the Kubernetes side. If Firmament by itself is not related to Kubernetes, then probably shouldn't be hosted under Kubernetes.
Well,
yeah, if you need both components to be deployed as a single unit, it helps to have them coupled inside of a repo. Just because the build artifacts will be there and people will look at the YAML and everything they need to do a deployment's right there. If they are totally decoupled and separate, then I'd probably recommend separate repos.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll let you know. I think let me huddle with my team and then we'll let you know.
Okay. Any other question, comments? Okay. Thanks, everyone. You're going to get 8 minutes back. Bye.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Bye.